I want you to think back to the last time you stood up from a chair. Did you do it smoothly in one fluid motion, or did you brace your hands against the armrests, push down with your palms, and grunt your way upright? If it's the second one, I need you to pay very close attention to the next few minutes, because what I'm about to tell you could be the difference between spending your 70s dancing at your grandchild's wedding or watching it from a wheelchair by the door. In 35 years of treating patients, I've watched a quiet thief walk into people's lives, and almost nobody notices it until it's already stolen something precious. It doesn't come with chest pain. It doesn't show up on a routine blood test. It creeps in through your legs. Starting somewhere in your 50s and accelerating hard after 60, your body begins losing 3 to 8% of its muscle mass every single decade. Doctors call this sarcopenia. And here's what almost nobody tells you at your annual checkup. It doesn't attack your whole body evenly. It goes straight for your quadriceps and your calves first, the very muscles that let you rise from a chair, catch yourself before a fall, and walk into your own kitchen without fear. Why there, of all places? Because your thigh and calf muscles are packed with what we call fast twitch fibers, the explosive, powerful fibers responsible for quick, forceful movement. They're the ones you use to catch your balance when you stumble on a curb. And it just so happens that fast twitch fibers are the most vulnerable to the biochemical changes of aging, declining hormone signaling, chronic low-grade inflammation, and a phenomenon called anabolic resistance, where your muscles simply stop listening to the protein you eat as efficiently as they used to. Harvard researchers studying age-related muscle loss have documented this pattern for decades, and Mayo Clinic's own geriatric data confirms it. Leg strength is often the first casualty of aging, long before memory or heart function shows any sign of trouble. Now, I want to stop you right here because I know where your mind just went. You're thinking about your mother, or maybe you're thinking about yourself in 10 years, shuffling instead of walking, afraid of stairs, afraid of ice on the sidewalk, afraid of losing the one thing that makes you you, your independence. I've sat across from patients living that exact fear. I've watched the moment when a proud, capable person realizes they can no longer trust their own legs. That fear is real, and I won't pretend otherwise. But here's what I need you to hear, because it changes everything. Sarcopenia is not your destiny. It is not a switch that flips at 60 and can never be reversed. It is a modifiable biological pathway, meaning the very mechanisms that cause it can be interrupted, slowed, and in many cases, rebuilt, starting with something as simple as what's on your plate tonight. Aging is not a life sentence. It's a set of biochemical conditions, and conditions can be changed. So stay with me, because in the next few minutes, I'm going to walk you through 6 specific foods backed by real clinical research, not internet folklore, that target this exact problem in this exact order, starting with the one that's been shown to boost muscle protein synthesis by up to 30% in adults over 65. Your legs carry your independence. Let's talk about how to feed them. Let's start with the food I put at the very top of this list, and there's a reason it comes first. If I could only recommend one single food to every patient over 60 walking into my office worried about their strength, it would be fatty fish, salmon, sardines, mackerel, not because it's trendy, not because it's fashionable in health circles, but because the clinical evidence behind it is some of the strongest I've seen in 3.5 decades of practice. Here's why it works. And I want you to really understand the mechanism, because understanding the why is what makes people actually stick with a change. Fatty fish is rich in 2 things your aging muscles are quietly starving for: omega, 3 fatty acids, specifically EPA and DHA, and vitamin D. Now, omega 3s do something remarkable inside your muscle cells. They directly stimulate what's called muscle protein synthesis, which is simply the process by which your body takes the protein you eat and actually builds it into new muscle tissue. In clinical studies of adults over 65, Regular intake of omega-3 rich fish has been shown to increase this muscle building process by up to 30%. Let that number sink in for a moment. 30%. That's not a marginal improvement. That's the difference between muscle that quietly wastes away and muscle that actively rebuilds itself. But there's a second piece to this puzzle, and it's the one most people never hear about. Remember what I told you a moment ago, that aging muscles develop something called anabolic resistance, where they become sluggish and unresponsive to the protein you feed them? Omega-3 fatty acids act almost like a key that unlocks the door again. They reduce chronic low-grade inflammation, what researchers call inflammaging, the slow-burning inflammatory fire that spreads through aging tissue and blunts your muscle's ability to respond to nutrition in the first place. So it's not just that fish gives you protein, it's that fish makes your muscles capable of actually using that protein again. I think of one of my patients, Walter, 72 years old, a retired mechanic who came to me frustrated because he felt like no matter what he ate, he kept getting weaker. We didn't overhaul his entire diet. We simply added salmon to his lunch 2 to 3 times a week. Within a few months, he told me, climbing the stairs to his workshop stopped feeling like a negotiation with his own knees. So here is your synergy tip for today. Eat fatty fish 2 to 3 times per week, and when you can, make it your lunch rather than your dinner. Why lunch? Because giving your body several hours to metabolize those omega-3s before an afternoon walk or your evening chair squats means the anti-inflammatory muscle priming effects are already working in your bloodstream right when your muscles need them most. This is the first building block. Now let's talk about the second one, and it's sitting in your refrigerator right now. Now let's talk about something you probably eat already, but maybe not the way you should be eating it. And once I explain the mechanism, I promise you'll never look at your breakfast the same way again. I'm talking about whole eggs. For years, patients walked into my office, repeating the same tired advice they'd heard for decades. Separate the whites, throw away the yolk, protect your heart. I want to gently correct that for you today, because that advice, well-intentioned as it was, may have quietly cost people their muscle strength. Here's why. The whole egg yolk included is the highest natural source of an amino acid called leucine. And leucine is not just another building block of protein. Think of it as a key that fits one very specific lock in your body, a cellular pathway called mTOR, which stands for mechanistic target of rapamycin. I like to describe mTOR to my patients as your body's muscle building switch. When leucine binds to it, mTOR flips on and your body shifts into active muscle building mode, repairing tissue, laying down new muscle fibers, reversing the very decline we talked about a moment ago. Here's what makes this so critical for you specifically at your age. As we discussed, aging muscle develops anabolic resistance. It becomes harder to trigger that mTOR switch than it was when you were 30 or 40. You need a bigger, more concentrated dose of leucine just to get the same response your body used to produce automatically. And that's exactly what makes eggs so uniquely powerful. Ounce for ounce, few everyday foods deliver leucine as efficiently and as completely as a whole egg with its full amino acid profile, working together rather than in fragments. I think of Eleanor, a patient of mine in her late 60s, who came in convinced eggs were bad for her heart, eating a bowl of dry cereal most mornings instead. We talked through the actual research together, and she agreed to try something different. Within a couple of months of adding real protein to her breakfast, she told me the fatigue she'd been blaming on just getting older had noticeably lifted by mid-morning. That's not a coincidence. That's her mTOR pathway finally getting the raw material it needed. So here is your synergy tip. Aim for 2 whole eggs at breakfast and don't discard the yolk. That's where the leucine and the fat-soluble nutrients are concentrated. This isn't about eating more food. It's about eating the right signal at the right time to remind your body that muscle building is still very much on the table, no matter your age. And speaking of timing, that brings us to the next piece of this puzzle, how well your body actually absorbs everything we've talked about so far. Now, here's something I wish more doctors talked about because it explains a frustration I hear constantly from my patients. Doctor, I'm eating more protein like you told me, so why don't I feel any stronger? The answer often has nothing to do with what you're eating and everything to do with what your body is actually able to absorb. This is where Greek yogurt and kefir come in, and I want you to understand why I place this third on our list right after fish and eggs. It's not a coincidence. Greek yogurt and kefir give you two things working together at once. First, they deliver whey protein, one of the fastest absorbing proteins available, entering your bloodstream and reaching your muscles quickly, almost like a rapid response team arriving right when it's needed. Second, and this is the part most people never hear, they deliver probiotics living cultures that support the health of your gut lining. Why does your gut matter for muscle strength? Because as we age, our digestive system quietly changes. Stomach acid production declines. Digestive enzyme output slows down. The gut lining itself becomes less efficient at pulling nutrients out of the food we eat and delivering them into the bloodstream where they can actually do something. So you could be eating a perfect diet, technically speaking, and still be leaving muscle building protein on the table, literally unabsorbed, simply because your gut isn't functioning the way it did at 40. This is one of the most under-discussed reasons older adults experience declining strength despite eating fine. The probiotics in yogurt and kefir help restore and support that absorption capacity, essentially making sure the fish and eggs we just talked about actually get where they need to go. I think about how many patients I've seen who increased their protein intake on paper, following every guideline correctly, yet saw no real change in strength or energy because nobody ever addressed the gut side of the equation. Nutrition isn't just about what goes into your mouth. It's about what your body can actually use. So here is your synergy tip. Add a serving of Greek yogurt or kefir as a mid-afternoon snack, not as part of your main meals. Think of it as priming your digestive system, waking up your gut, and preparing it to absorb the larger protein meal that follows, whether that's dinner or your next big source of nutrition. It's a small, quiet adjustment, but it's the difference between protein that passes through you and protein that actually becomes muscle. Now, let's move from what fuels your muscles to what fuels the blood flow that keeps them alive and working, because your legs can have all the protein in the world, and it won't matter if the oxygen can't get there. Now, I want to shift gears for a moment, because everything we've talked about so far, the fish, the eggs, the yogurt, has been about giving your muscles the raw materials to rebuild. But raw materials mean nothing if they can't actually reach the muscle in the first place. And that brings us to something I consider one of the most underappreciated tools in healthy aging. Beets and leafy greens like spinach, arugula, and kale. Let me explain the mechanism because it's genuinely elegant. These vegetables are rich in dietary nitrates, and when you consume them, your body converts those nitrates into a molecule called nitric oxide. I like to describe nitric oxide to my patients as the substance that opens the valve on your body's plumbing system. Think of your blood vessels as a network of rivers and garden hoses running throughout your body. Nitric oxide is what widens those hoses, relaxing and dilating your capillaries so that oxygen-rich blood can actually flow into your leg muscles more freely. And your leg muscles, especially those fast twitch fibers we discussed earlier, are hungry for oxygen every time you stand, walk, or climb a set of stairs. Here's what I find remarkable about this particular intervention. Unlike some changes that take months to show results, the nitrate to nitric oxide pathway works fast. Research has shown measurable improvements in walking endurance in as little as 3 days of consistent intake. 3 days. In a field where we usually tell patients, give it 6 to 8 weeks, that kind of rapid response is genuinely rare. And it's one of the reasons I get excited explaining this to people who feel discouraged and impatient about their strength. I remember explaining this to a patient, Walter, whom I mentioned earlier, the retired mechanic. He told me that even short walks to his mailbox had started leaving him winded, and he assumed that was simply old age catching up with him. What was actually happening was more specific than that. His capillaries weren't dilating the way they used to, and oxygen delivery to his legs had quietly declined. Within days of incorporating beet juice and leafy greens into his routine, he noticed the walk to the mailbox didn't leave him gasping the way it had before. So here is your synergy tip. Drink a glass of beet juice or eat a serving of leafy greens like spinach or arugula 30 to 60 minutes before you walk or exercise. That timing matters. You're essentially opening the hoses right before you need the water flowing. Feed your muscles and open the pathway that delivers the fuel. Next, let's talk about a problem that strikes many of my patients in the middle of the night, robbing them of sleep and leaving their legs aching by morning. Let me ask you something many of my patients nod along to immediately. Have you ever been jolted awake in the middle of the night by a sudden, painful cramp in your calf? That sharp, seizing pain that makes you sit bolt upright and grab your leg, wondering what on earth just happened. If you've experienced this, you are far from alone. And I want to explain exactly why it happens and, more importantly, how to stop it. This is where lentils, chickpeas, and black beans earn their place on this list. These plant proteins carry something beyond just protein itself. They're rich in magnesium and potassium, two minerals that play a critical, often overlooked role in what we call neuromuscular signaling. Think of it this way. Every time your muscle contracts and relaxes, it's because of an electrical signal traveling from your nerves into your muscle fibers, and that signal depends entirely on a delicate balance of minerals moving in and out of your cells. Magnesium and potassium are essentially the gatekeepers of that electrical balance. When your levels run low, which becomes increasingly common with age, certain medications, and changes in kidney function, that signaling becomes erratic. The result is what you experience as a cramp, a muscle firing uncontrollably because the electrical system controlling it has become unstable. This matters even more when you consider everything else we've discussed today. You could be eating all the right proteins, activating mTOR with your eggs, absorbing everything beautifully thanks to your gut health, delivering oxygen efficiently through nitric oxide, and still undermine all of that progress if your neuromuscular signaling is unstable and cramping is interrupting your sleep, your walks, and your confidence in your own legs. I've had many patients describe this exact pattern to me: strong intentions, good diets on paper, yet still plagued by nighttime cramps that left them exhausted and hesitant to trust their own legs the next morning. Once we specifically address magnesium and potassium intake through foods like lentils and chickpeas, that piece of the puzzle often resolved in a way that surprised them. So here's your synergy tip. Add half a cup of lentils, chickpeas, or black beans to your dinner. Why dinner specifically? Because nighttime is exactly when cramps tend to strike, and having these minerals actively circulating in your system while you sleep gives your neuromuscular signaling the stability it needs through those vulnerable overnight hours. Now, let's talk about a final, quieter threat working against your muscles in the background, one you can't feel directly, but one that's been slowly eroding your strength for years. Now I want to tell you about an enemy that never announces itself. It doesn't cause a sharp cramp like the one we just discussed. It doesn't leave you gasping on the way to the mailbox. It works silently in the background, day after day, year after year. And by the time most people notice its damage, a great deal of muscle has already been quietly broken down. I'm talking about chronic, low-grade inflammation. And the food I want to give you to fight it is something you can hold in the palm of your hand: walnuts and pumpkin seeds. Here's the mechanism, and it ties together almost everything we've discussed today. Walnuts and pumpkin seeds provide a plant-based form of omega-3 called ALA, along with two minerals, zinc and magnesium, that work together to calm this background inflammatory process. Remember what I told you earlier about inflammaging, that slow-burning inflammatory fire that spreads through aging tissue? It doesn't just blunt your muscles' response to protein. Left unchecked, it actively accelerates the breakdown of muscle tissue itself, working against every other effort we've talked about today, the fish, the eggs, the yogurt, the beets, the beans. You can be doing everything right and still be fighting an uphill battle if this quiet inflammatory fire keeps burning underneath it all. Zinc plays its own critical role here too. It's directly involved in the repair and regeneration of muscle tissue at the cellular level, supporting the very rebuilding process that leucine and mTOR kick into gear. So think of walnuts and pumpkin seeds as playing defense, while the other foods on this list play offense. You need both. Building new muscle while inflammation tears it down in the background is like filling a bucket with a hole in the bottom. Eventually, defense has to match offense, or you're simply running in place. I've watched patients do everything right on paper, hitting their protein targets, exercising consistently, and still plateau. Still feel like their strength wasn't quite catching up to their effort. In more cases than I can count, addressing this quiet, inflammatory piece was the missing link that finally let their progress accelerate. So here is your synergy tip. Eat a small handful, about 1 ounce, of walnuts or pumpkin seeds each day, ideally as your afternoon snack. It's a small habit, easy to forget, but it's quietly protecting everything you've worked to build throughout the rest of your day. Now that we've covered all 6 foods, let's bring this together into a single, simple protocol you can start tonight, because knowledge without action changes nothing. So let's bring everything together, because I don't want you to walk away from this video with 6 separate facts floating around in your head. I want you to walk away with a single, unified understanding of what's actually happening inside your body and exactly what to do about it starting tonight. Here's the truth I want you to really absorb. Nutrition alone isn't enough, and exercise alone isn't enough. It's the combination, the synergy of the two working together that creates real, measurable change in aging muscle. When you eat the foods we discussed today, you're supplying the raw materials, the leucine to flip on mTOR, the omega-3s to prime protein synthesis, the nitric oxide to deliver oxygen, the magnesium and potassium to stabilize your nerve signals. But raw materials sitting unused don't build anything. Muscle only rebuilds when it's given a reason to a signal that says, we need this tissue, keep it, strengthen it. That signal comes from movement. Specifically, from a simple exercise I give nearly every patient over 60 who walks into my office worried about their legs. The chair squat, 10 repetitions, 3 times throughout the day. Stand up from a chair without using your hands, sit back down with control, and repeat. That's it. When you pair that movement with the nutrition we've discussed, you create a synergistic effect. The food supplies the building blocks, and the movement tells your body exactly where to use them. Now, I need to leave you with one warning, because I've seen this mistake undo months of good effort. Never skip breakfast protein. Remember what we discussed about anabolic resistance. Your aging muscles need a stronger, more concentrated signal to activate mTOR than they used to. That means timing your largest protein meal within 1 hour of waking up isn't a small detail. It's one of the most important adjustments you can make. Skipping it, or pushing protein to later in the day, means your body spends its most vulnerable morning hours in a catabolic state, quietly breaking down the very tissue you're trying to protect. So here are your 3 actions, starting today. First, don't skip a protein-rich breakfast, 2 whole eggs, ideally alongside or near fatty fish or Greek yogurt through the week. Second, eat your largest protein meal within 1 hour of waking, giving your body the concentrated signal it needs to overcome anabolic resistance. Third, commit to your chair squats, 10 repetitions, 3 times a day, every single day, pairing movement with the nutrition fueling it. I've spent 35 years watching what happens when people take their legs for granted, and I've spent just as many years watching what happens when they don't. The difference isn't genetics, and it isn't luck. It's consistency in small, science-backed choices made daily. Your legs carry your independence, your ability to walk into your own kitchen, to chase after your grandchildren, to stand at a wedding and dance without fear. Feed them tonight, not tomorrow. I want to hear from you. Comment below with your age and the health challenge you're facing right now. You are not alone in this, and I read every single one. If this video gave you something you didn't know before, subscribe, because I share medical knowledge here that you simply won't find in a 5-minute headline. And if you know someone, a parent, a spouse, a friend, quietly struggling with their strength and their independence, share this with them today. It might be the window of opportunity they've been waiting for. Take care of yourself, and I'll see you in the next one.